So take us from, what was your, I mean, I guess your goal would be Olympia, right?
Absolutely.
And you're in the parking lot living and breathing bodybuilding as best you can. How did that transform, and how many years did it take for you to kind of figure out, to walk through the industry, and then to figure out you really didn't want to be a bodybuilder on stage anymore? So, because obviously you retired at some point. So kind of lead us through that chapter.
So, yeah, moving to LA, clearly one focus. So everything else in my life would need to, point me in that direction. So jobs or schedules of any sort. It took me a few weeks. It took me about a week and a half, I think, to find a job. I got a job at Bodies in Motion to run their Century City location. And it was a great success story. I started there in November because 9/11 had just hit. It took me a little while to get, it took me a few weeks to decide to move. And then by the time I got there, got that job, so I was tasked with trying to boost sales in the most difficult time of the year, as you know, in the industry. Right. And I ended up selling more. We developed these combined fitness packages with memberships that were driving huge sales, because we were doing these, like, depending on how much you were training, somewhere between $1,000 and like $2,500 a month memberships. And so we ended up netting or grossing, more for that particular location in the month of November and December than they had ever netted in any previous month in the 15 years or whatever that they had been in business. So then that bolstered me up through that company and gave me a great opportunity, because they basically came to me at the end of there and said, look, what do you want? You're killing this thing.
What do you want?
Yeah. And I just said, well, I've got my fiance now, because I asked her to marry me before I came down so that I could lock her up, I said, I got this, my fiance is up in San Jose, that she was running the gyms and just been promoted to regional manager by the McCaw Group. I don't know if you remember those guys. Jerry McCaw owned about 5 facilities in the Bay Area. And so she had been working for him for a number of years. And obviously I wanted her to come down. And so then they gave her the Santa Monica location. And that's how we got our foothold. So we stayed there for a while. I ended up transitioning out of there because I could do way better. Actually, I started personal training at Gold's because I started to get enough activity in the media that I could draw, pretty significant, money by personal training and doing that.
You could be independent trainer at Gold, right?
Well, back then you could. I don't know this now, but yeah, I mean, you just paid whatever it was, $350 a month in rent, and then you got to run a business.
Hey, side note really quick, Chris, were you there? And I don't think you were there when the trainers didn't have to pay anything.
No. Wow.
When I
there.
I know, right? Can you imagine? I was out there in 95, and I actually, started dating the manager at the time. Maybe you
didn't have to pay.
Bodybuilders, we never had to pay anyways. Like bodybuilding and fitness, like the celebrity people of the industry never had to pay.
Ed Connors being such a big supporter of it, right? I mean, he saw this as a pathway for these struggling bodybuilders. Right. Yeah.
Well, I never was a trainer out of Gold's Gym, but I just remember the uproar when they finally came in and said, all the trainers have to pay. And I think at the time it was $280 a month. And a lot of the trainers just flipped out about it. They were like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy. We've never had to pay. And they're like $280 like for a month. That's not bad. That was in probably somewhere in 96, because I remember the whole uproar about it. And then they started charging, and I don't know what it is now, obviously, and you can't be an independent trainer there now. You have to be part of the corporate, but back then, like, no no overhead costs. Like, just think of all the people, how much money they were making, some of those bodybuilders, and not having to pay for any overhead. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I just had this memory, and I was like, I remember the trainers all freaking out about it.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I mean, this is when I began to really understand the mentality of bodybuilders, which for me, I viewed as an absolute advantage. And what I mean by that is these bodybuilders, if you take an aspiring bodybuilder and you say, hey, I'm going to give you $30,000 a year doing whatever, and then that way you can focus 100% on bodybuilding. So this guy will take that money, he'll sleep all day, eat, train, and do the minimal amount so he can get that money. And so because in his mind, he's like, I got to focus 100% on bodybuilding.
Right.
Whereas for me, I always felt like that was I'm least productive when I'm not busy, mentally and physically. And so, I worked like 14-hour days because basically I could fill my schedule as much as I wanted to and at the time I'm probably charging, beginning years, probably like $60 an hour. Yeah. And then that grew into like 100 and then sometimes even, $120 an hour. And I'm thinking, dude, and then the majority, a lot of it was cash, right?
Right. Back then. Yeah. People just pay cash.
I'd give incentives and get an extra session or whatever if they paid me in cash. So I was cash wealthy, really. And being able to thus fund, this relatively expensive sport, given everything you have to do for it. And it's funny because I popped on the scene, in 2001 and, at the time Chris was there, Flex was there, you wouldn't really see much of Paul. Titus was there in and out, Melvin Anthony, gosh, and I'm sure
you're like in the mix with all the crew.
Oh yeah. And now, when you first show up, you're not part of any crew. You're nobody cares,
right?
And then
nobody cares.
And then it
unless you're a girl, then everybody cares. Girl. Like, cause I remember, like, it was chaos. But once everyone understood that I was there to work and not, see everybody,
and honestly, Monica, you're touching on one part of the industry that really, whenever I finally got out, I was so glad to be away from the narcissistic component. I viewed myself as this failed athlete that found bodybuilding, and for whatever reason, genetically, I had a disposition that could work for it. And so it was about working hard, driving as fast as I could to be the best in the world. And I didn't party. I didn't, I wasn't dating all these girls and doing all that stuff. I had a fiance. We were very focused. Mm-hmm. And it played very well. I mean, I show up in 2001. I won the USA the first time I showed up in 2003. And it's funny, when we were prepping for that, I told everybody, because I had placed third in the Cal in 2002. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I was pissed because I got beat by Jerome Ferguson and
I remember him.
Dang it. Another guy, I really love him, actually. He's a great guy. I'll think of it shortly.
Matt would probably know every single person that was in the lineup.
So I got beat by these two guys, and I was so pissed off because I'm like, and in fact, Rinaldi and gosh, man, it started to pull all these names up, but all these judges, they literally pulled me aside and they're like, look, if you just would be, tighter, you would smash this thing, right? And I told Hani, I was working with Hani Rambod. I said, I'm not competing again until I can win the USA, period. And so I think I competed in 2002 at the Cal, so call it May of 2002, around on stage at like probably around 225 ish. And then I showed up at the USA in July of 2003, and I win the super heavyweight division, weighing in. I weighed in that year at 242 or 243.
Wow. And how tall are you again?
I was, I used to be 5'11". I just measured myself. I'm like a quarter now. I don't What's
Oh my God.
But so yeah, so very focused, winning that USA. And as I was prepping, Alan Grimes had just taken second to 𝗬𝗬cie heç𝗀𝗂𝗯𝗲 in the year before. So he was, framed as, he was going to win this thing. And he and I were, very competitively, but always friendly, training in golds and doing the whole thing. And I told everybody, I said, I'm going to freaking win this thing. And they're like, dude, nobody wins USA the first time you show up. Right. And I just said, man, it's a different era. And Alan Grimes ended up placing, I think, like maybe 5th or something. And the guy who took second was Dave Palumbo.
Oh, Dave.
Best he ever placed, I believe, in national competition. And yeah, man.
Yeah. Trip down memory lane.
Oh yeah, I tell you what. And this was. Go ahead.
You were just like on top of everything, like feeling.
Oh
like
yeah. So
awesome.
So I
hard and everything.
Like from being in the see like this like you jumped and like what you worked so hard for came to fruition, and you recognize that this is not the case for everybody. Like you were able to have this like self-awareness, which is the polar opposite of what a narcissist is. I mean, that the way that you're going through your journey even is literally like the opposite of a narcissist, even though you're like surrounded by what you feel like is this narcissistic energy, So it's kind of
it's a really interesting thing. I'm going to tell you a very interesting story, and again, this is not. It's just an experience, right? It's not, and being someone who grew up with the mindset, like I've been a Christian my entire life, and so when I came in 1999. I flew down from Alaska to watch Melvin Anthony compete in the USA, if you remember, and he won.
Yes.
And man, he broke me. And you remember Melvin's routines and stuff, man. It was
yes, he was a great routine and great physique, smile, everything.
Yeah, he had the whole thing, the whole package. And so when I came, I arrived in my hotel and I'm by myself, and first time in California, I'm like, beautiful California. And the first thing I want to do is go down and like swim in a pool because I don't know. I just had this thing, like I'm in California, I'm going to go swim. So I go out the pool and I literally go and I'm frolicking in the pool and this this gentleman comes up to me. I need a place to sit down, so I asked this guy, saying, he's sitting beside an empty one of those lay down chairs, and I said, do you mind if I use this? And he's like, no, go ahead. So I scooted over and I kind of was just sitting there, and this guy, he says to me, you here for the USA? And I'm like, oh yeah. And this is like probably mid-50s, like regular looking fellow, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, I happen to be. I'm like, are you? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. And I'm like, well, what gets you into bodybuilding? And he says, well, I invest in bodybuilders.
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm thinking like, oh, he owns a supplement company, or a clothing company. And so I'm like, well, tell me more about this. Like, what do you mean? And he says, well, he goes, he says, I happen to be gay, and I know how much money it takes to be a professional bodybuilder.
Oh, I know this story. Oh my
God. So, it seems it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And it took me a minute.
You're like mutually beneficial.
Monica.
I'm a very naive. And I'm like,
how is it mutually beneficial?
Well, obviously I figured it out, right?
Listen to the story.
And I said, well, how does this work exactly? And he's like, well, how much, he goes, I'll give you $100 to go up to my room with me. And I literally was just like, obviously all the lights went on.
I think they hadn't already. Now they have.
Oh man. And I'm like, I'm sitting there thinking about it, and there's this awkward component because he's not like a mean person, or he's a nice guy, and I'm not offended in the sense of like getting angry or anything. I'm just like, so I said, no. I said, but I tell you what I'll do. And I turn my back and I sit like this to him, and I go, for that $100, you could put sunscreen on my back. Right. And of course he chuckled. I thought you were going to tell. No, he chuckled and declined and never went on there. But that introduction right there became a very kind of integral in this process that I think so many bodybuilders, because of the nature of the business, the expense, and of course your fan base, it becomes sometimes difficult to navigate for folks, especially for those who are not able to monetize. That's where I was very, very lucky. I hit the scene at a time where the bleach blonde bodybuilder, there was only 3 of us. It was me, Jay, and Gunther. That was it.
Yeah.
And so before me, it was Jay and Gunther. Right. And at the time, now put this in a little bit of perspective, at the time, from just a pure aesthetics perspective, Jay and Gunther were like big, blocky dudes.
Right.
Whereas this is before I was 300 pounds in the off season, but I had more of a, I guess what you would do or consider like physique.
Or the classic physique, maybe.
Exactly. And so from a magazine and promotion, sponsorship perspective,
like your look. They definitely like it.
It worked. I mean, my hair, as you can tell, that's my natural color is red. So but I bleached that sucker out quick because I knew or understood that. I mean, frankly, I actually thought I looked better with blonde hair. That's probably the true reason. But then.
But you want to keep your hair, so you decided to stop bleaching it.
Exactly. Well, I just at 40 some years old, I can't.
You don't think you can rock it now?
I'll just look like an idiot,
Hey, 40 is the new 20. You can still rock it.
I don't know. So, but yeah, that was it set the stage for how I managed my career, and I think it really helped me. Look, the fan base is fantastic. I like of all sorts, shapes and sizes. I love people. I love explaining the process.
Yeah.
Of becoming who I was, and so many people are interested, but I never let that, steer me away, or even the girls thing, right? I mean, it's a very tricky road.
It really is. And, for men and women, obviously I didn't have the male experience, but I had the female experience, and, and was single for many years out there, just trying to, figure out the boundaries and, making sure my reputation was what it was, and working hard, and, just trying to carve out that space, because, there wasn't too many other women doing it either. So we were all kind of in the same boat, trying to make our path. And I know there was a lot of help from a lot of different sources. So I'm assuming you found some good sources as well as the unfavorable. You had some good sources that helped guide too.
It's interesting though, because, a lot of people these days are like living and dying by the sword, if you think about it, because everyone can pretty much create their own brand, right? And essentially people are able to pave their own way and be influencers and, take on, like, there's a million different companies, why the clothing companies you were mentioning before, we don't hear about them anymore, because rather than having like a couple well-known brands, there's like hundreds of clothing companies. You can't even keep them straight, but people are pretty much doing the same thing, but they're dictating it, and they're, they have like control of their own agency now, for better or for worse, because like I said, people live and die by the sword. Like, you put yourself out there so much, but then when something goes awry, you're pretty much going down just as fast as you came up. And so it's a really interesting, way of, people getting through their dreams. People have to find a way to fund it and to do what they want to do. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, I don't know if anything's necessarily changed, just the mode in which people, figure it out is different, I guess.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Well,
So I want to hear how you told your fiance about that story.
yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, guess what just happened?
Oh yeah, that's exactly how it would go. Like you wouldn't believe this, you know. Yeah, you know, very interesting. I mean, it's but
Sure
you
that
know,
wasn't the only time.
yeah, it's a funny thing, but for a kid that's, you know, literally coming from Alaska almost, you know, and like just this, you know, I didn't know that was a part of the system, if you call it that, or, you know, I just didn't understand it. So you know, it was.
I mean, you want to think about your stepping into a professional business and athletic endeavorment that is highly respected and has, you know, opportunity. And so that's what, you know, I think you probably were thinking. I know that's for me too. Like I was just trying to figure out, like, how do I make this a career, and how to, you know, what's the proper steps. So I wasn't just, you know, I was trying not to flip flop around. So, you know, we step into these things with that idea of, you know, we're going to be professional. We're going to create something magical, or we're going to change the world with what we do. Or, you know, we have those big dreams. And then when something like that happens, you're like, and then you find out that that's kind of typical for the industry. It is a little bit of a letdown, right? But it doesn't mean that that's, you know, for everybody's path, but it's a, you know, kind of a funny thing for, you're like, okay, that's not where I want to go with this, and we're going to move on.
Well, I think I understand it, like behaviorally, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the tricky thing about this bodybuilding thing, this fitness industry, is you're so focused on you.
Yeah.
And everyone around you is so focused on them. And then because of that, you know, it's producing a lot of really attractive people, you know,
for sure.
And they're all like-minded.
They don't all have the same moral integrity either, though.
The majority don't, which is the world. That's so all
they're just greedy to make more money, right?
Yeah. And so then, you know, that it's easy for that to become confusing.
Right.
And if you don't, especially if you don't come into it with, you know, that God foundation, right?
Right.
And for me, it's Christ, and that's always hanging over. And look, you know, we make mistakes, and we do things that you look back and you're like, oh, dang it, man, I just wish I could erase that one. And even while doing it, I was listening to a sermon actually this morning by 𝗬𝗂𝘁𝘂𝗯𝗲, like, even in the middle of doing that, God is present. He's there. Yeah. And the blessing for me is that I felt that, you know, throughout my whole life, but that was, you know, kept me pretty darn straight and narrow, but also became a source of frustration toward the end as well. And why I said, I'm just out, you know, I've kind of achieved a lot, and the balance of that going forward just doesn't make sense, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to take a really short break, and when we come back, I want to dive into a little bit to that mindset of yours of, hey, this is not for me. I'm going to move into another area, because obviously you stayed within the industry, but just in a different area of it. So I can't wait to hear about that. So don't go away, anybody. We'll be right back with more of Chris Cook and finding out what caused him to retire and where he took his career after that. So we'll be right back. Hi everyone, Monica here. Just wanted to thank you so much for watching the Monica Brant Show, and don't forget to subscribe, like, share these videos, and oh yeah, and that little bell notification, don't forget to click that so you'll get more great content every time there's a show uploaded or a video or anything else. So you guys, thank you so much for your support, and as always, stay fit and love life.